Today, I am thrilled to have Dr. Ron Wolk. He truly is a distinguished orthodontist and he has over 40 years of experience. And Dr. Wolk has decided that he was going to dedicate his career to advancing orthodontics. And he served as president of the Canadian Association of Orthodontists, the Alberta Society of Orthodontists, and the Pacific Coast Society of Orthodontists. From his roots in Winnipeg to his long-time practice in Calgary, and now at Fraser Valley Dental Specialists in Abbotsford, BC. Dr. Wolk has seen it all. Now, in this session, Dr. Wolk will reflect on his journey and share some valuable insights on what he would tell his younger self if he could turn back time. Let's get started. Thank you, Dr. Wolk, for joining today. This webinar is a passion of mine. I got the inspiration a few months ago, dear younger self. And I know certainly when I ask this question, not only of myself, but even of those who have done the webinar before you, there is a moment where you can see their wheels are turning. And so I know it's a bit of a process to come and think this through. However, when we met a few weeks ago, you really had a really interesting sort of little caveat to how we're going to do this. And you had said, there were some things that I did at the beginning that I would definitely do again. And I thought that was just a really interesting way to think about it. So where would you like to start? What is that number one thing that you would definitely do again?
Well, first of all, Lorraine, thanks for inviting me to do this, and I'll share with you the best way I can. So, a few things when I was invited to chat with you and given this topic, the first thing that came to mind was, I've had a very long career. It's 45 plus years in private practice, and there's just some things that came to mind that, wow. I'm glad I really approached it that way because I feel good about my career and how I've approached things. So a few points. One of the first points was I thought to set a work-life balance, it's important to kind of pick your days a week that you'd like to be working in the office or attending to your profession. And I call that my 4-day a week decision. For me, the 4-day week fit, but it was really about setting that life balance of how hard I wanted to work and how many days a week I feel I wanted to devote to whatever family or private things or hobbies or anything like that. And so once I experienced the number of days and the number of hours working, then I kind of set the pace of my lifestyle choices. And the lifestyle choices are either ones that you're comfortable with, in which case you leave things as they are. In my case, a 4-day week worked fine. I never worked on a Friday. I always left that day for myself or my family. But if you felt your lifestyle demanded more, then you work harder. If you feel that you can get by with less and work less, then so be it. Maybe you want to do 3 days. But I felt that was a good decision to make right from the beginning, to establish how hard number of days a week I wanted to work.
And that really set the pace for how you were going to build your practice, right? So if you knew that going in, it meant that you weren't working 7 days a week, because all too often entrepreneurs, essentially, right? Because every orthodontist that has their own practice has their own business. They jump in with both feet and sacrifice so much, right? My husband's an entrepreneur. He has his own business. And, I remember him saying to me years ago, I really feel like I missed out in our first son's, like his babyhood, right? And that was a decision that, unfortunately, we learned today that it didn't necessarily have to be that way. There was a way to manage this better. So I think that that's incredibly valuable to those that are just starting out on the 4. I wish with all my heart I could do a 4-day week. And honestly, I think it should be across the board. You know, we just had the Labor Day here in the United States, and everybody had that 3-day weekend. And it made such an incredible difference to my workload when it comes to chores and spending time with my family and spending time with my husband and how much time I can put towards working out. So,
And once you make that decision and you start, I mean, the inclination is to dive in with both feet, like you said.
mhm.
Once you make that decision and the wheels are turning, the hamster wheel is grinding,
Yes.
um, then all of a sudden you realize, wow, I'd like to cut back. But now you're saying, okay, I'm going to have to cut back staff. I'm going to have to cut back office hours,
Yeah.
availability for patients. So it affects your decision making and you feel pulled in both directions.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you start off with one choice, then you have to make those adjustments. But
Mhm.
your experience tells you I need to make those adjustments.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
know, we could stop the webinar right now. I mean, it is such incredible knowledge for everyone just, starting out in their careers is draw your line in the sand and build from there.
Mhm.
Incredible. Now, you also mentioned, because you sent me some notes here, so you also mentioned working with a partner. So tell me about that.
Well, I thought that was another sort of tick off the boxes, another good thing that um, I felt it was important partner, and I had the opportunity to do that. And for any individual, if it's not an in-house partner, a real close mentor would be important. Um, it was so comfortable having that daily or frequent interaction with a colleague. And I was blessed to have a very good colleague. I'll mention the name, Dr. Barry Hoffman, and he was a classmate in grad school, but we just hit it off together. And throughout our practice, we sat back to back in the office and we'd bounce ideas off each other. There'd be times where there was mutual support for each other.
Mhm.
Sometimes things don't go your way, but you have that colleague to interact with and gain support from, and also give support to. It's kind of a like a working marriage of sorts, and that's what it was. But it
Yeah.
felt very comfortable rather than being isolated on your own and having to have those interactions outside of office hours.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it was, I think, working with a partner is a really was a real good choice I made.
Making decisions on your own, and I get to experience that because we're a small company. And, many times I call you and bounce ideas off of you.
Mm.
But, I can totally relate to that in the sense that I talk to my four walls, and my four walls tell me, you're completely right, Lorraine, all the time.
Yeah.
But the idea of being able to bounce an idea off someone else and say, is that crazy? Is that a crazy idea? And somebody else go, no, like that's an amazing idea, or yeah, that's a crazy one. That's really valuable. And you were lucky in the sense that you guys ran the practice together. Is that how it was set up?
It was, yes. Yeah.
And you
So
didn't have individual offices, as you said, you sat back to back.
right. And so it like I said, it was a marriage. Like we were doing it together. We were
Yeah.
the practice was our I guess child in a yeah, as an analogy, and that's the way we ran it. But also the positive interaction was good. But there were times where you're just down in the dumps. You did something maybe you didn't you questioned yourself, and having that support was also very
Mm.
helpful.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's wonderful. And then you also talk about something that I believe strongly in, and you said become involved. So sort of expand on that for me.
So I became early in my years, just a few years out of practice. Someone tapped me on another colleague tapped me on the shoulder and said, you'd be good at doing this. And I entered into the leadership of organized orthodontics or organized dentistry. So that was close to my heart, and it gave me an opportunity to develop lifelong friendships.
Mm,
It gave me insight into the dynamics of the profession and what was coming on the leading edge,
mm,
and being exposed. to the experience and the journey of others in the profession from very different geographical backgrounds, other parts of the country, other parts of the world,
Mhm.
and also their demographic backgrounds. And it, just by having that interaction, it was very energizing.
Mhm.
it just recharged the batteries, and those friendships that were developed along the way were very deep because
Mhm.
we were experiencing something together.
Mhm.
And I think leadership in organized uh, orthodontics or organized dentistry or organization of any of the professions or fields you're in is definitely helpful to become involved in it, put your
Mhm.
energy into it.
And you said the word, I followed my heart. And in what I do every day, that this is a large part of where I seek people within the company, right? Where is their strength? Where are their weaknesses? And what are they passionate about? And so your career and you can correct me if I'm wrong, became a part of your passion. It was something that you felt it was beyond getting up and going to work every day. It was something that fulfilled you, and this was part of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It really was. And it was something I actually looked forward to, other than the day-to-day work and clinical work, looking forward to those interactions. It gave you that motivation because you always had something you were looking forward to doing or seeing them or looking forward to those interactions again.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Absolutely. And
Absolutely.
again, you also hit on you were in a group that was spread across Canada and the United States, right? And so you got to hear sort of the trends of what was working and what wasn't working from a geographical perspective. Like in Beverly Hills, this was working, but in Nebraska, this was working, right? I mean, I'm just throwing words at you, but
Oh,
there's
sure.
incredible value to that.
Right. You're right, right. And people look at the same thing we look at through different lenses
Yes.
based on their, like I say, their demographics and geographical locations. They see things differently
Yeah.
and looking at the same thing, but they see it differently.
And you also got then to communicate with different mindsets because many times as we sort of move through our career, you change your mind about things, right? But it all starts at one point, which is your mindset. And then you build based off that mindset. And I think I have found through my years, 33 years of been in the industry, is that I've sort of adjusted my mindset, which sort of opened up a whole new world that I hadn't seen before. It's looking through a different lens, right? I
Absolutely.
believe that's very powerful.
And it was. It's like I said, I would do it all over again.
Yeah. Now, on here, you wrote take some risk. And, I think probably those that are just sort of starting their careers, they're fearful of mistakes, right? They're fearful of not even knowing what the future holds. But tell me more about some of the risks that you took.
Well, the risk is like stepping out of your comfort zone, in and
Mm,
as something like stepping into leadership. When
mhm.
someone taps you on the shoulder and says, you can do this, because your first inclination was, no, not me, maybe someone else. But when you when you when you take that risk and you're out of your comfort zone, you get to experience is sort of something very different in yourself because it gives you the opportunity to think differently and to have those different human interactions. And so that's in taking that risk. If you didn't do that, you would just be on, like you say, you're within your four walls and you're always going to agree with yourself.
Yeah.
So it's like stepping away from those four walls into the
Mhm.
other room. Um, and it just gave me a better understanding and open to others and how they behave and how they think.
Mhm.
And I'm glad I did that.
Mhm.
I'm like I said, I would do it all over again. I'm glad I took that risk because there was a time where I just never felt I could. I
Mhm.
remember my graduate director, Robert Isaacson, where I was at the University of Minnesota. I remember him saying to me when I was speaking up about something, I can't remember what the issue was in our time together, but he said to me, you know, you have a voice and you should keep using it. And I'm glad I did, because at that point I never felt that I'd do anything other than do my little work.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, training for. Yeah.
This is actually a topic that since I started doing this type of series, that has repeated over and over again in each one of the interviews, which was don't be frightened of making mistakes. One of the things that you had wrote is you are only human and
Right.
humans are allowed to make mistakes. And that kind of leads me into that final one, which for here is make linear mistakes, not circular ones. I love that, by the way.
So yeah, so it's very true. I mean, with along with taking the risk, is there are some things that aren't going to work out the way you think they are, and you try something and you go, oh gosh, I wish I didn't do that, or I did that wrong. Um, we're human, like you mentioned, so we are going to make mistakes. Nobody's perfect, of course, but if we can learn from those mistakes and not make the same ones over and over again, those are the circular mistakes. So, yeah, so if you don't take the risks, you're not going to make the mistakes. And if you do make the mistakes, accept them and move on. And getting back on the horse is another cliche.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And, be willing, I find certainly for me personally, when I made a mistake in the past many years ago, not only would I be hard on myself, but I would almost try to be embarrassed, right? And try to cover it up and sort of, just sort of, we'll just move on from that. And I don't want to think about that anymore. So
Yeah.
I think for me, in what I heard you say was you got to be willing to look at them and say, okay, I'm gonna take that one on the chin as a mistake, and how can I do better, right? Like, so you have to be critical of yourself, but allow yourself to look at it, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Easier said than done, right?
I'll make your linear mistakes, but don't make the circular ones.
It's good. I'm going to use that one as like the name of this. Dear younger self, we'll make that as like the slogan. So if you were to go back in time and you were to give yourself some words of wisdom. So it's now 1978, right? That's the year you started your practice. And, just thinking back to who you were and where you came from and this moment in time, what would be maybe a couple of things that would be words of wisdom?
So a couple of things come to mind. The first thing that jumps out, though, and I think I've heard this from almost every one of these interviews you've done. I think everybody goes back and says, of the professionals, is I wish I would have learned the basic business skills.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I'm from the generation back in the 70s and the 80s when I was going through high school, 60s and 70s,
Mm-hmm.
going through training, dental school and graduate school. It was never part of the training.
Right.
You learned about practice management by watching one of your professors or your instructors and how they did things and what they tell you in the lab as you're doing your lab work and sitting and they're over your shoulder and you'd have those sort of casual conversations, but you never really learned the business skills of
Mm-hmm.
exactly understanding, how cash flow works,
Mm-hmm.
how to manage HR issues in an office, your staff issues, and how to learn things that are everyday part of life that every individual has to do in their adulthood. Taxes. So how do you fill out a tax form? So a little anecdote is my father was a bookkeeper.
Oh.
So I grew up in that household. So you think, okay, I'm going to start in my practice, and I started as an associate and earned a revenue. And I was getting the revenue. I think I was newly married at the time, and I remember going to my father and saying, Dad, where do I get the money to pay the rent? Where do I get the money to buy groceries? We're going out for dinners and buying things for our apartment. Where do I get how does that money come out of the practice?
Right.
So he had to sit down and show me,
Yeah.
and how to keep track of it. So those business skills, they're available now. I think the American Association of Orthodontists promotes an MBA program with I think
Oh,
it's the New York
wow.
School of Business.
Interesting.
Boy, I wish again. What would I tell
Yeah.
my younger self? I wish I would have done that training.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's definitely been a repeat conversation in these
yeah.
webinars.
And
And in fact,
I just had, I just
I even had a webinar with Kathy Jugovic yesterday. And as people in our age group, we get to see that repeated over and over again, that there's just like a little gap that if it was filled, we would be setting our new orthodontist up for quicker, faster, more success, right? To move their practices forward without quite so much of a struggle. Dr. Briggs always said, if you learn these things ahead of time, it helps you sleep better at night.
yeah.
So,
I have to say one other thing. My young daughter-in-law ended up when my son met her and early on in their relationship, she was getting her MBA degree.
hmm,
And that was before she went on to dental school and has since gone on to graduate school and is now working on the East Coast. But I'm so proud of her for having that background of business sense, which is,
yeah,
I wish I would have had that.
right,
But
right.
she's got it. So, it's like you want in your children what you wish you would have had. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
So you would go back to your younger self, back in those days you could have read, you couldn't have Googled it.
exactly.
For
Oh,
all those young people out there, it's like to learn something new. We'll call it the olden days. There was no
exactly.
Googling, you would have had to have bought a book if there was books, I'm sure there was even back in those days. But great. It's something that repeats over and over again. And then one of the last things that you wrote in Dear Younger Self section was you talk about like a practice consultant. So tell me more about that.
So later on in my career, I was at least 30 plus years into practice because it was a while ago. Um, we ended up deciding, my partner and I ended up deciding to hire a practice consultant.
Hmm.
And I just wish I had done that so early on,
Mm,
so much more earlier on. It was, if you look back and you consider, here you are as a young graduate, you're coming out, you're starting your career, you're like you're like the football player who's graduating and going onto the field and to play the game, but you need a coach.
right.
And you
Right.
sometimes a team of coaches because they look at things a different way and you're playing the game, you're executing the play,
Mhm.
but they're coaching behind the lines, what works, what doesn't work. And
Mm,
they're looking at all the analytics behind the decisions that you make and how it's working out. Uh, is it working? Is that play being successful?
mhm.
And what could you do differently? Keep providing ideas. And I just wish I would have had that at least in my first, I say 2 to 3 years of
Mm,
practice, no more than 5 years in.
yeah.
Um, because you've got your rest of your career and I felt it, I think, I think I'm very proud of our practice together, but I think we would have enhanced it
Mhm.
if we would have had that coaching all along as a third party. Because again, sometimes you feel, oh, I can just do it better myself because
Yeah.
I'm the player. I'm the one out here doing it. I know better, but that's not true because I think another set of eyes on you is helpful.
Yeah. I mean,
So
and coaches are looking at what you're doing even from a different perspective than it's just not in your perspective, right? And sometimes, what is it they say? You can't see the forest for the trees because you're in it and you're doing it and you're
Yeah,
just sort of in there. Like I call it being in the fog. And sometimes you just step away from the fog and view it differently is just really highly valuable. And of course, we have so many amazing consultants out there that are more than capable of doing that. So, what was it like in 1978? Was there consultants around at that time?
yeah, I'm sure there were. You know
Yeah,
what? I go back then, I was so blinded by just being in our own lane that
yeah,
I wasn't paying attention, but I'm sure there were, and
yeah,
it's not very, and they became gradually more and more
yeah.
prominent in our profession.
Hmm.
But let me just add one point to that is like like choosing the partner, the coach has got to be someone that you're amenable with.
Yes.
The chemistry's got to be there
Yeah.
in order for it to be successful. And yes, there are partnerships that don't work out, and there's maybe
Hmm.
some consultant agreements that don't work out. But I I think you just have to find one that works for you because the concept is what's more important. And if I had to do it all over again, I what I tell my younger self is I get on board with a consultant and
Mm.
work closely with them. And there's some very good ones out there. And yeah,
Really the overarching topic is you can't be good at everything.
yeah,
But you're really good at being an orthodontist and moving teeth and the clinical aspect and that's really what you should be concentrating on because that's how you build reputation, right?
exactly.
And it's okay to say I'm maybe not great at this, and it's okay to reach out and find that perfect partnership, right? To take your practice to the next level. And as Dr. Briggs said, help you sleep at night.
Yes, yes.
Now, you wrote a really interesting philosophy. So it's PAP. So tell me about it. How did you come up with this?
It was, I'm sure I probably came across it somewhere in my past, but it's kind of I call it PAP. It's my passion, activism, and purpose.
Mm,
The passion is a kind of a philosophy, and the passion comes from pursuing something that you're interested in.
mhm,
And if you have the interest and you have the passion for it, I think making it working towards it becomes that much
mm,
more helpful to you. And that passion may not be popular and it may not be traditional, but
mhm,
if it's your passion, it's going to be something for you.
mhm,
And I think, I look back at even my own children,
mhm.
uh, they pursue different interests and different passions, but they're good at what they do, all
Right.
three of them. And so um, I think that really is a good philosophy because you can't make somebody do something or force somebody to do something. It's
Couldn't
got to
agree
be,
with you more.
yeah, yeah. And the next one is activism. And the activism is, again, going back to becoming involved. Um, you have to be part of what you're doing and let your voice be heard. Be active in what you're doing. And that means by sharing ideas. And when you're sharing ideas, other people share their ideas with you. And that's where that whole interaction, it just starts to meld and flow and actually blossom. And
Mhm.
so if it wasn't for that activism, if it wasn't for becoming involved, again, you'd be within your four walls and just listening to yourself. So
Yeah.
activism is very important. And that leads to purpose. That's the last P. And the purpose is investing time and energy into what's meaningful to you. It gives meaning to whatever that is.
Mhm.
If, putting in the time, putting in the energy gives it value to yourself. And the more you put into it, again, the old cliche, the more you put in, the more you get out. And that's where the purpose comes in. So that PAP philosophy is passion, activism, and purpose. I think is really something that's valuable.
And I think, when I read that at the end of the day, if you're loving and you're passionate about what you do every day, you never work another day in your life, right?
It
So
was
that
squeezing.
falls perfectly into that.
That's
Exactly.
that's why I'm coming up 50 years in practice because I'm still well, I'm not working. 50 years. This is they say, when are you going to retire? Retire means I retire from what?
Right.
Yeah.
I don't want to retire from something that is part of my life and that I love. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's incredible insight. And, as always, I love chatting with you. We chat a lot and I appreciate you so much. You're a value partner here at Retainers for Life. And I know without a shadow of a doubt that what you shared with us today will shine a light for many. So thank you so much. I appreciate you.
You're very kind, very kind. Thank you, Lorraine. You take care and thank you for this.
You're welcome.